All right. So, Enrique, let's get into it. We heard from Andrew, but we've got the five things. Why don't you get us started here?
Yeah, so look, we'll go through these. I want to introduce them. The first one that's been a huge topic of conversation. I have CNBC back there on the TV. Is what they call the halving. This is in regards to Bitcoin, where the productivity of mining of Bitcoin is literally going to be cut by 50%. This means that it makes it much more expensive to produce incremental Bitcoin, and it means that the growth in supply of Bitcoin will slow substantially. There's a lot of very interesting ramifications. This is what I call a deep cut, meaning it's a very subtle issue, even though it's getting a lot of play out there. But let's start, Gary. Tell us what you think of the halving that is literally happening here on April 21st, 2024.
Yeah. So I believe it happened on Friday.
Oh, there you
Um,
go. My bad.
yeah. No, it's all right. Happened on Friday. It's the fourth Bitcoin halving in history. So here's the way it works. There are people called miners that are using sophisticated computers to solve mathematical problems. And somebody will get the right answer roughly every 10 minutes or so. And when they do, their reward is a certain number of Bitcoin. And as of last Thursday, there were roughly 900 Bitcoin being mined every day. So every day, the supply was another 900. As of Friday evening, that just got cut to 450. So that changes your stock to flow ratio, which is just a fancy way of saying the number of new Bitcoin compared to the existing stock of Bitcoin is coming down. And the term that we use to describe that is saying that makes it harder. Something where it's very difficult to create new supply in relation to the size of the existing stock is considered hard. The opposite would be something soft like the US dollar, where somebody in Washington can push a button and there's another few trillion dollars. To give you a sense of magnitude, since Bitcoin since its existence began approximately, God, what was it, 14 years ago? Something like
Yeah.
that. Roughly 19.7 million Bitcoin have been mined. That's out of a total of 21 million. And so that means 94% of the total supply that will ever be in existence is already in existence. The other 6% will be mined over the next roughly 115 years. And so as the halvings happen roughly every 4 years, the reward to miners will continue to be cut in half. So we just had the fourth one, that reward being cut in half is why it's called the halving. The last point that I'd add before getting your impression on this, Enrique, is the reason Friday's halving was significant is it actually made Bitcoin harder than gold. So typically there's a certain amount of gold that's been mined since the beginning of history. And it's roughly almost enough to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool, just to give you a sense of how much or how little gold that would be. But every year, the increase in supply of gold is about 2%, sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but about 2%. And so we look at that and we say, okay, the supply of gold goes up by about 2% a year. That's pretty hard. It's hard to mine new gold. It's a lot of work. Well, as of Friday, Bitcoin is now roughly twice as hard as gold. The stock to flow ratio for Bitcoin is twice as good as it is for gold. And then in another 4 years, it will get twice as good again. And so that's why this matters.
Yeah, no, look, I agree with everything you say there. The one thing I would say is I feel like the halvings at this point are very small catalysts, but they're important in the overall narrative. The reality is going from a 4% growth to a 2% growth is not a huge change, but I think the stair step functions in demand that we have seen and that we will see. And a stair step function is, instead of having demand go up in a line, it sort of goes like this and then jumps. I think they're huge, and I'll throw in, and not to change the topic from the halving, but just having come back from Uruguay, I think that the challenge that a lot of American investors have is they don't really understand the international aspect of Bitcoin. You know, when we sit here and we watch CNBC and we think about America and Blackstone ETF and this, that, and the other, we're not thinking about Argentina. We're not thinking about Turkey. We're not thinking about the the dozens of countries all over the world where people are looking at Bitcoin as a store of value that is far superior to gold. And that's not that gold is bad. It's just it's a lot easier to transact in Bitcoin than it is in walking around with gold bars. So, you know, we've been a fan. I honestly think that Bitcoin can go to 100,000. I think Bitcoin can go to 1 million. And again, because there's 500 million people or 600 billion people in the developed world, and I think we're very focused on that. There's 600 million. There's 6 billion in the developing world, and I think this is going to become more and more of a proxy for them. So I look at the halving as like a good quality quarter in the 30-year narrative of what's going to be one of the greatest growth stocks of all time. So I'm glad they got another good quarter, and it helps move along that narrative that's going to make this thing go up another 20-fold from here, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you're highlighting the impact on people who don't earn their money in dollars. It's really easy for Americans to say, "What do you need Bitcoin for? We have dollars." But you know, it's really easy for them to forget that most of the rest of the world does not get paid in dollars. And if you're in Argentina, Venezuela, Egypt, right now, large parts of the world have horrible inflation and horrible financial controls. I would also add one other thing. I think there's a moral case for Bitcoin. There's a huge civil liberties issue. You know, we've seen in developed countries like Canada and Great Britain that theoretically make some sort of nod toward freedom of speech. We've seen people who have views that the government doesn't like, where they've just said, you can't have a bank account. We're freezing your bank account. Or, you know, the banks have been told, if you serve this person, you're going to have regulatory problems. And so people, all of a sudden, they can't be banked. And what do you do? How do you get paid? How do you pay people? Where do you store money? You know, you can't just store cash in your mattress and think it'll all be fine. Bitcoin is an option, and it's an option for people who care to express views that the government may not like. And, you know, I would just suggest, like, if you're listening to this and thinking, oh, well, you know, but the Canadian truckers were bad guys and I didn't like what they had to say, or, you know, the guys in Great Britain, I didn't like their politics, it wouldn't happen to me. I assure you, at some point, the people in Washington will change. You'll have a different party in control. And some of the things that you think, and some of the things that you're comfortable saying, and some of your closely held beliefs will be unpopular at some point. And so free speech is for everyone. And if speaking your mind means that you can't have a bank account, the fact that Bitcoin exists, I think there's a moral case to be made for greater human freedom. And I'm very strongly in favor of that.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. It's a great domestic one, and it's a great international